How goes it? Streets okay?
Yeah, let's go crazy. Flaming up for you. We'll call this meeting to order. The Monday, April 17th, the City Council work session. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Sheldon. Here. Brackman.
Here.
I'm trying to run. Here. Reynolds.
Present.
Faulkner.
Here.
Russell.
Here.
DeVersa.
Here.
Eklund. Here. And President Gold.
Here. Thank you. We have a short agenda tonight, but we do have some very important items. But at this point, I'll open it up for anyone from the public who'd like to speak. So if you'd like to speak, just state your name and address and limit your remarks to 5 minutes.
Hello, council members. My name is Karen McElroy. This is my sister Amy, and born and raised on the north side and west sides. And I'm here, I work on a partnership grant. The partnership is between Sheriff Fletcherone and the Department of Mental Hygiene, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about the fee that people are required to pay when they want a birth certificate in Jamestown. The fee is $30, which is 3 times as high as the Dunkirk fee. It is also 3 times as high as Batavia, Binghamton, Lackawanna, Niagara Falls, North Tonawanda, Poughkeepsie, Utica, and the $30 fee hurts a lot of people. We need the birth certificate for things like the Real ID coming up, which a lot of people will need. We need the birth certificate for things like the New York State driver's license or the non-driver's license. We need the birth certificate for benefits, for jobs, sometimes for apartments. We have a lot of youth who are interested in working, and they cannot do so because they need to find money to get a birth certificate. So I'm asking the council to please reduce the fee from $30 to $10 if possible. And if you don't want to do it on a permanent basis, maybe you can do it for a one-year pilot stub and see what the implications are. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to the council? Get your name and address. Okay. We'll look into the comparisons and costs and fees and so forth. Appreciate you stopping in.
I believe we ended up, that's what the New York State charges, and we had it changed about 4 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, that's right, 2020.
Yeah.
We put it through in 2020, effective 21.
But that was when, at that point, I think it was determined that we were low compared to, but I do know Batavia is $10.
Monroe County's also 30.
But it was in line with what the state, we had to request that because there were so many complications in trying to get those records and all the manpower behind, man and women power to get those records, so it was done and we did have it changed, but it was, we had to request it, it was not, and it had been, I think, very low for many, many years, but it was decided that we needed to recover what the state was allowing and what the state was charging, so.
$10 is still the state fee unless you get special permission from the legislature, which the city was one of those localities.
Go
that did.
online and look, if you go to the state, do it online, it's $40.
Yes, but under state law, municipalities can only charge $10 unless they've been given special request by the legislature, and so Jamestown, amongst other communities, have. Mostly because of the state fee has gone up tremendously as part of it. I know Karen's been in my office having conversations in the work that she does, and I think there might be some request for various programs that may want to reduce that fee. So, for example, those coming back in to the community on a reentry program. There's also been some discussion on those that are part of domestic violence incidents as well.
Do we have a number or an annual average of how many requests there are?
I could get that for you. Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It is a lot.
Sure. Go ahead.
Russell, I think we owe 21211. Just a question, do you have to show up personally to get a copy of your birth certificate? Is that how that works, Jennifer?
You don't have to. It's quicker if you can because you get it the same day.
Okay.
But people from out of the area will request through writing, through email.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, my grandson just got one in West Virginia. It was $5. But it's West Virginia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the issue? We'll have a discussion. We'll look into it.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks. Tell your dad we said hi. We miss him. I miss him. And he was right. It's on the second floor usually.
Okay.
Right. Alright. Okay, we'll move on. I know, I think all of these three resolutions come out of finance, I believe. So Kim, if you want to start with the
Sure.
first one there.
So the first one is to suspend the hiring freeze and hire 8 full-time firefighters in the Jamestown Firefight Department to fill the vacancies within the fire department. I don't know if that's really an accurate statement because this is a grant, so it's not really filling vacancies. Sorry, I just stumbled on that reading that.
Yeah.
We can change it.
Yep.
Yeah,
I saw
so-
that too. I thought it was kind of funny.
I think it was just a standard resolution we
It
popped in,
is.
but we can make that change for you all.
So it would be to fill new positions within the Jamestown Fire Department. Funding will be provided through fiscal year 2021. Staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grant program. So today, we got at about 3 o'clock the numbers that Joe Bolito prepared for us to review. I personally did not have a lot of time to look through these because of work and other obligations. I'm not sure what anybody else had a chance to review. So I guess if someone wants to start firing a question, or any questions, I will look. These are way off from the initial numbers that you gave us, Zach. They're kind of significantly different. So I'm sure some people will have some questions.
Trying to find the original.
The original,
I don't have it.
I do. I have the email. I don't know if I can just decipher it. I tried to get through it before, but getting it late didn't help. So for 2027, it's way off, but let's go back to that.
It was on 327.
So 23 to 24, the total that if I'm understanding your initial email correctly, you had roughly 527,000. 24 to 25, you had 634,305, and 25 to 26, you had 654,953.26. The grant covers. I want to understand the math. The grant covers 1.8 million, roughly.
$1,816,201.
Right. And we're at, the numbers prepared in front of us are 2.119,678.
That's correct. That's a three-year estimate. That does not include any revenue from ambulance in it.
Correct. And neither does the Safer grant though.
Correct.
So I just want to compare apples to apples.
Absolutely.
So everyone understands 2023 is 6 months, 2026 is 6 months.
This also includes turnout gear and other equipment that was requested that wasn't part of the original amounts.
Just a one-time 32?
I believe so, right?
Okay,
Yes,
because
and-
I
and
do
the
have a question on that,
Workers'
because,
comp as well. Just Councilmember Eckler just wanted us to note that was the original grant submission, and we had the numbers that I had pulled for that, so that was why the numbers are
okay,
a bit different. So that was what we had put in for the Safer grant and were rewarded.
okay. In your email number 2, the cost to outfit a firefighter actually is $37,640 plus $77,60 for uniforms.
Yes, this does not include uniforms.
Right.
Yep.
So if we take out the 32, it's still. Let's try again. 2119. 688. 208,7678. Leaving a gap of 271, 476, 88. So, for clarity, there's a lot of rhetoric out in the community, and I get it. It's a hot topic. This council cares very deeply about this fire department, despite what's being said out there, and especially Chairwoman Eklund's refusal to bring it forward out of finance. The job of finance is to get all the numbers before we bring everything forward, regardless of what the vote is, whether it's firefighters, whether it's spending money on a software program. It doesn't matter what it is. That's the purpose of the finance committee. So I want to make that clear and concise. The rhetoric is that everything is free. Why don't we do it for free? This just is a prime example that it's not for free. So to do this, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, is a cost of $271,476.88 without turnout gear, without schooling, without uniforms, and the other incidentals that I know I have mentioned on occasion. So, with that being said, without me digging further, I guess the initial numbers you gave Matt to Zach to provide to us was roughly 45,500 to send all 13 to school, which would include the 5 that we approved as true replacements in the fire department last month.
That's correct.
Trying to think if there was something else. I guess the one question I had I didn't really get an answer on, and I was gonna ask it earlier, is when you applied for this grant, you included a set number of firefighters as your manpower level. Did that or did that not include the 4 through ARPA?
When we applied for the grant?
You said you had to maintain that level. What level is it? Is it?
It did not
okay.
include the 4 from ARPA.
Okay. And the 4 from ARPA budgeted are set to, I guess, end their funding at the end of 2026 as well. Is that correct, Mayor?
Yes, it would be till 2026 unless there's funding
So
still
they would go
available.
coincide.
Yep.
So you're saying that we would not be responsible to maintain those 4 ARPA positions? Is that what you're saying, Chief? Because you did not include those in the grant? Or am I misinterpreting what you're saying?
So at the time that we applied for the grant, which was January, February of '22, the 4 ARPA positions were not included in that number. The SAFER grant does require us to send a roster that is reflective of the number of personnel that you have on staff at the time of award. That number does include the 4 ARPA positions because they are employees of the fire department.
So for clarification, that's the question I asked, and I got misled there. We need to maintain the 4 throughout the SAFER grant.
4 ARPA
Because
positions.
if we accept this award, it's gonna include that 4 at that time we accept it.
That is correct.
Okay.
Do you know what the number that was submitted is for manpower?
For the safer
For the same.
8.
No,
Or are you
no.
asking the
The
total?
total.
Total.
The total manpower.
57.
In the 2023 budget, what was the manpower number that was budgeted for without the ARPA, or like the budget?
The number of positions?
Yes, sir.
Zach's going to grab the budget book too, so that we can.
While we're waiting for that, I'll just jump in and add something to this, that these numbers that we received today, they are only, the annual salaries are only based on 2,080 hours base salary, plus $625 EMT bonus. These numbers do not include any overtime at all. They do not include comp time sellback or any kind of impact pay or other forms of compensation, from what I'm seeing. These are assuming that these firefighters do not work a single hour of overtime in 36 months, which is unrealistic. There's going to be overtime involved. I guess it'd be kind of interesting to see what the average overtime is for a firefighter in the city of Jamestown on an annual basis. Would kind of give us an idea what these firefighters right here that are coming on could potentially have for overtime with callbacks, which we often see. The other thing that I wanted to point out too was for the people that are here or the people that are watching online, when we're talking these numbers and these salaries, people don't take into account an employee's total package for employment. And these numbers that are broke down, and I'm hoping that the media that's here will be provided with these numbers at the end of the night, but these aren't just salaries for 2023, the rest of 2023 and 2026. You're talking about a total salary of $1,298,650. But then you have to add on Social Security costs, $99,347. New York State retirement, our responsibility to provide to the New York State retirement system, $262,327. The cost of the city health insurance and dental insurance of $372,955. Workman's compensation payments, $54,400, and the discussion on turnout gear of $32,000, for a total cost of, and I know that was adjusted, $2,119,678. So that's for the years of the grant, which was at $1.8 million. So obviously there is a shortage. But then when you look down at 2026 to 2029, when either we apply for the grant and receive it, or we don't receive it, obviously we would be silly not to reapply for the grant again. But if we don't get it, then you're talking about these costs jump up. Every single columns that I just listed here jump up, and people can see it as these are passed out. But those total costs jump up from the $2,119,000 up to $2,428,000. Now, as we sit here and we do budgets on an annual basis, we all know that our budget cannot increase by $2,428,000, which means ultimately, if we apply for this grant 3 years from now and we don't get this grant money, we're going to be laying off at least 8 firefighters. So the people that are potentially getting hired, they're going to fill these positions if this passes, have to know up front, in 36 months, you might be handed a pink slip, possibly, and you might be out of a job. And I can pretty much guarantee that if that happens, there's going to be a backlash or an uproar from the fire department. I understand that. I was part of a union. I know how it works. They're doing their jobs. The union officials wouldn't be doing their jobs if they weren't fighting for members, if they weren't putting signs in yards, if they weren't being active on social media. They wouldn't be doing their jobs if they weren't doing it. But I just want it to be very clear for the public that our budget can't handle this increase. And if we don't get this grant renewed in 36 months, pink slips are going to be handed out. People will be laid off because we can't get rid of positions through attrition over the next 36 months. We have to maintain 57 people according to the fire chief, which includes those 4 ARPA positions. So as long as everyone's aware of that and what the ramifications potentially are going forward with these numbers.
Well, that also doesn't assume the increased cost of health insurance, which we know will go up because you're going to have to guesstimate how much more that will be. And contract negotiations again.
Sure.
This is not going to cover all the way through, and any cost of living adjustment or raises is going to be another factor compounded, which is going to make the cost go up even more.
I think Mr. Bolito did include in here health and dental insurance cost increases 2% a year.
But
Yes.
that's about,
Right, and then he also included in here annual salary increases of 2.5% used for 2025 and 2026, so.
but you can't, I mean,
Sure.
it gives you a
Just
little
give you
bit,
an estimate.
but it's not gonna give you what could be the actuality.
Speaking of the numbers, Chief Poon, are you included in that total number of firefighters for the grant as well as the impact?
For the grant, yes. For impact, no. Councilman Faulkner, there were 59 total budgeted positions in the budget. 4 of which were replacements, so there was really 55 line personnel. We had a vacancy that occurred after January 1st, and then we also anticipated 2 retirements out of that number.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But all things considered, if you were fully staffed right now, including the 5 that we just approved last month, this is just saying they were hired, how many firefighters and what would that number be today?
That number would be, with the 5 replacements, that would put us
Yeah,
at
just-
at a total staff of 56 line personnel, would be a total staff of 60, plus 1 administrative assistant.
There's just a lot of talk that the fire department has been cut, and in fact, that just proves that you have not been cut. Granted, you don't have those 5 persons yet, but outside of this, you're gonna have those 5 regardless. It's a matter of if you're gonna have 5 or 13.
So we've been talking about the second ambulance for a while. Obviously, it came forward. If this grant weren't to have come to us, would we have been able to staff a second ambulance with the ARPA hires that we hired?
The short answer would be yes. The staffing and deployment of fire department equipment solely rests with the fire department's management, so if a second ambulance would be needed in the 4 upper positions, it was included when we discussed that last May, that it would assist in deploying out the second ambulance.
With those ARPA positions.
That's correct.
The
We
comment, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say that we could deploy a second ambulance, but we were in the process of labor negotiations to make that happen.
The common concern that I hear among the firefighters, is the deployment of the ladder truck during, ambulance calls. If these 8 positions are declined and they're not hired, and we have those 4 ARPA positions in there, you're saying that an ambulance can still be deployed, is what you just said, correct?
I did.
What about the ladder truck? Can the ladder truck be deployed at the same time that they're out on a rescue call if these 8 positions are not hired?
No, it cannot.
Okay. How many short would that leave to be able to deploy the ladder truck? If they were out on a rescue, on an ambulance call?
It depends on the staffing of the day, which is kind of how the impact is figured. So if there's 3 persons on duty at City Hall and they have an EMS call, whether it's with Ambulance 1 or with Medic 35, the ladder truck is unstaffed. So the ladder truck can't run without a minimum of 3 personnel on it, so it would require an additional 3 personnel to be assigned to City Hall to have both ambulances run and have the ladder truck still remain in service.
Another comment that I've heard made over and over again is that the second ambulance, and the revenue from that second ambulance would pay for these positions later on. Would you agree with the statement that based on the revenue from the first ambulance that we've seen, roughly 300,000, would you agree with the statement that the second ambulance, based on the numbers you're seeing tonight, would not fund 8 positions? Would you say that's accurate?
I would say that's accurate.
Okay.
I do believe, if I could add to that statement, that the 4 ARPA funded positions that were put in place last year, the ambulance revenue would support those
Right.
in their entirety.
But not these.
The additional 8 would certainly be a challenge.
So I wanted to touch base on the mention of layoffs as well, just for clarity. You provided us with a roster that included 14 names who would be eligible through attrition, possibly, should they choose to do so, are eligible for retirement. I want to make it clear that the first 2 on that list, we already replaced last month. So we're down to 12. Is that a correct statement?
That is true.
Okay.
I included those names on there because they were also included on the Safer Grant roster.
Okay. I just wanna make sure I wasn't missing something.
So for budgeting purposes, so when we get to 26, the total cost per year, you're saying it's 381,000.
It's half a year.
Or for the half, well, for
Yeah.
that year, and then it goes up to 766 for 27, 810, and what was the other one? I wrote over the top of it. 970?
470.
470
for half a year.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So those would be per year for those, that year, that budget year, correct? Here, This is
for
just the
26 to
total,
29.
yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yes, those would be the total cost per year after 2026.
So the 2.4 million will be the grand total for the 4 years combined.
After the
After
grant.
the
After the
Safer
grant.
Act
Yep.
ends.
Okay.
Currently, you're looking at a difference of around 90 grand per year while we have the Safer Grant. So for the cost of essentially one firefighter, you get 7 additional ones.
I'd like to point out also that people are asking in surrounding communities, the number of mutual aid calls that this fire department in this city requires help from outside agencies is quite astounding. Chief Kuhn mentioned in our last session that it's gonna be upwards of 500 calls by the end of this year. I think it's pretty clear that our city fire department and our residents need to have these firefighters staffed and keep the city solvent and safe and give the residents something for their tax dollars, particularly with safety and public service being primary.
In 2022, there were 468 mutual aid calls into the city. 2021, there was 419. And as of the last meeting we had, year to date for 2023 was 114.
So All-Star EMS running less calls a year, or are they maintaining pretty steady? Obviously, the call volume's going up, but is All-Star kind of
It's different calls, different,
right? But for medic,
the number of calls are up, I believe, on
I-
top
I-
of other issues.
I think we're still seeing All-Star doing more of the long-range transports and going out of service. If that's a fair assessment, Chief?
It is, the total call volume still continues to increase. So All-Stars, basically, they're providing us the same service level that we've been accustomed to for many years.
that's awesome.
But yeah, it's truly the call volume is what's increasing.
You say the same level of staffing, but it's, then you're basically saying they're lacking, because we had this conversation before that that's the right, why we're in the position we're in is because they're lacking. They're out of service. You know, a couple years ago, we sat down, the floor down, and we had people from All-Star getting rid of a gentleman's agreement from years ago and actually signing paperwork saying that they were gonna have a level of service. Now you're saying that level of service is not being met, is that correct?
Is that a question for me or?
Either one.
I don't think you said that it was a different level of service. I mean, I think under our agreement, they were agreeing to provide, is it 1 ambulance or 2 ambulances in the city?
2 ambulances in the city.
2 ambulances in the city as well as billing.
As available.
But obviously it's still a problem because, I mean,
That is.
nothing has changed from 3 or 4 years ago when we were sending out RFPs and so the issue still exists.
The issue still exists, yes, that is not changed.
And I would say it's because of the level of service that we're not receiving, is what I'm driving at here.
I think it's partial, I don't think it's total.
There's partial. I think the other issue to consider is that the reimbursement rates for ambulance service have not changed, which I think has caused a shift in the ambulance market. So that just continues to be an issue.
And as far as the volunteers coming in, obviously, I don't wanna see the volunteers taxed, as far as the work, coming in, but they can also bill now too, for our ambulance calls, so they're actually making money off coming in the city.
Yes and no. They can bill, but if they are coming in the city, they'll need an agreement with the city. So we are working with our surrounding municipalities to establish those agreements
So
to
they're
allow
not
them to
billing
bill.
at this time yet.
I don't believe
They are
so.
not.
No, mm-mm. Unless they have an agreement currently with the county that has a billing provider.
So I will review these numbers with Joe, but what I come up with, in year 2023, which we already have a budget for, it's a roughly, as you stated, $45,246.15 plus the $45,400 in turnout gear and uniforms for a grand total of a $90,646.15 cost. Is that right?
Yep, sounds about right. Yep.
Year 2024 will be 9492.29. Year 25 will be the same. 26 will be a $45,246.14.
So I would agree that, with your statement, that we're getting 7 firefighters for the cost of 1. I think that statement is a little bit short-sighted though, no disrespect, sir, it's kinda short-sighted, cause you're not thinking about the future. When someone runs their home, they're paying their bills, you can't think about, just today, you gotta think down the line what the future is, and you can't be reckless or irresponsible and just think about today, you have to look at the future. And that's my concern, is future budgets, and also, for these men or women that take these 8 positions and come in, go through all of this training, make a commitment to the city, maybe even purchase a home in the city, and in 36 months they're handed a pink slip. I'm saying this from a personal standpoint, because after a year and a half or so on the job at the Jamestown Police Department, I was handed a pink slip by Mayor Teresi. And so I know what that feels like, the panic, the fear, what am I gonna do now? He pulled some of those pink slips back, only 3 people got laid off, but, one of those people had to go to Cortland, another one ended up going to the sheriff's department. These people were displaced from the area, had to leave their families. Those are the things I'm thinking about, not only the numbers, but also these 8 people that possibly get hired and could possibly get laid off 36 months from now. Also, those 4 ARPA positions that if the grant is, if we apply for the grant, we get a grant, we get the grant again, we are still gonna continue to be responsible for those 4 ARPA positions, which that ARPA money's gonna be gone, but we're still gonna have to have those 4 positions in there. So it's really not 8 positions, it's really 12 is what we'd be responsible for. Because we're gonna have to maintain per the grant those numbers exactly, which is going to include those 4 ARPA positions. So we're not talking about 8 positions here, we're talking about 12 positions here that would be mandated.
So that being said, if you wanted to add that in for the cost, I guess you could possibly take those years after and divide by half for the other 4 positions, if that's truly the case.
So you're talking $3.6 million in total benefit package at the end of 3 years. And if the city wanted to maintain those positions, if we didn't get the FEMA grant again, you're talking $3.6 million roughly that would have to be put into our budget to maintain those numbers. I don't think anyone here can say that that's realistic, that we could do that. And if someone says it is realistic, I would say that they're not thinking about the long term, and it's reckless. It's financially reckless to think that we can add $3.6 million into our budget. I would love more firefighters. I would love more police officers. But it comes down to what can this community and what can our taxpayers afford? And I think our taxpayers and the people reading the newspaper and the people seeing social media don't see this stuff. They're looking at stuff on the surface, they're looking at the propaganda out there, and they're not really digging into the numbers and seeing how is it going to affect our budget, how is it going to affect the taxpayers in the city. And the taxpayers cannot afford $3.6 million. We can't raise taxes that much because we are close to our constitutional tax limit in the city. So that's kind of where we're at. I agree. I want to hire these 8 firefighters. I want these 8 firefighters to be working for the city. Personal note, they dragged me to WCA during COVID when I was sick as hell and treated me awesome. They were absolutely outstanding, and I was so grateful to have them there. But we have to look at the reality of this too, and we have to look at the numbers of this and make sure that we're being responsible, not for tomorrow, but 3 years from now. So we don't make a huge financial mistake. So we don't wreck people's lives that get hired, and 36 months from now, we're handing those pink slips out to people and saying bye-bye. Sorry, you're out of a job. I really don't want to do that.
This is why we are all elected to make those hard decisions.
Absolutely.
So, I
People
mean,
need to be educated on
I
why
think-
they
I
make
think
those
that-
decisions.
one of the reasons why tonight is important is to make sure that people do understand the position that we're in and the decisions we have to make, not only today. And I think, Jeff, you're right on the money with this, that, yeah, these are important positions. It would be awesome to have them. But I think people need to understand the reality that if this grant, if we're not given an extension or an upgrade to this grant in 3 years, there's absolutely no way that we can afford to keep them on. And that, and I'll reiterate this again, I'm the only one in this room who's had to sit through that. And when I talk about making hard decisions, I was there. And when we had to cut firemen and policemen, we are close to our constitutional tax. Even if we wanted to add $3 million to our budget, we can't legally do it, right? So, as long as people understand that, and, you know, I hope that if this passes, we can get that grant extended. I don't know what the chances are of that. I mean,
You're still gonna have to, for clarity, you're still gonna have to pay for the other 4
Right.
out of the budget.
We can apply to have those removed from the grant for the second round. Since they were funded by federal funds, they could be removed in the second round of the grant. But still the same.
Do you have any statistics on, or any idea of how many of the communities that have been extended? Are there others that have had extensions to their?
I don't have that number offhand, but we could certainly reach out to FEMA and ask. It is very rare for communities to receive this grant. Typical communities that decline the grant will not usually see FEMA funding for about another 10 years. But we can get you the actual number from FEMA, or we can ask FEMA for that question.
I mean, the best case scenario is if we accepted this grant and it was renewed in 3 years, buys more time to try to figure out more revenue sources to be able to pay for that in the long run, and possibly at that point, through attrition, you do.
Can't, just because of the ARPA, I just was
Well, I know,
calculating
but
that. I was just calculating that out.
What's that?
So the way I understand, we all agreed on the ARPA for firemen is that, as we just did last month, we're gonna replace those so we're gonna remain 4 above throughout this term through 2026. So looking at your retirement list, just roughly, if all of them went between now and 2026 that are eligible, that's only 8. And highly unlikely, to be honest with you, that all 8 are gonna go. Might be 6, might be 4, maybe it'll be all 8, but I'm not that much of a gambler because some of them are pretty young. So that being said, the two that are currently eligible have not put in their paperwork. And they generally put in a year in advance.
That is correct.
So the first two come off the list for me right now. So that leaves us with 6. 2 and 04 that started. So best case scenario, one of them, the date's already passed. It's past a year because past February 24th. So he's not going for a while. So that's my point. Like, we're not gonna lose all of these in that timely fashion. So we're gonna get stuck, not me, whoever the future council and mayor is personally per se, but possibly laying off from ARPA anyway. Potentially,
One of those members is signed up to retire next year.
okay? It's not, we haven't seen the budget book, so you're speaking from that, we're not, for us, it's not visible, so. Just throwing it out there, all things to consider.
Does anybody else?
How's this going to affect negotiations for minimum staffing under contract negotiations? Is this going to then be with the additional?
Could you say that one more time?
I wanted to know how this would affect negotiations and contracts, that if we hit this new minimum level, are they going to continue to want to maintain that minimum level?
Impact payment?
The impact payment.
Yeah, so impact is based on, and Mr. Armando can correct me if I'm wrong, impact is based on a decision that had a minimum level, minimum number of individuals. They, go ahead.
Okay. So for the fire department, it works a little bit different than the police department. It's based on the amount of individuals that are on shift, rather than the amount of individuals that are part of the department. Impact payment, as I recall, starts at 12 firefighters per shift. So if we dip below that number, we would have to pay impact payment. So with the addition of these extra firefighters, obviously there would be no impact payment whatsoever that would affect the fire department for at least the next 3 years.
That's not reflected in this.
So what you're saying is they won't renegotiate because we're at 12 currently as this baseline?
I believe we should be at 12 right now as the baseline, so there would be no real conversations about impact right now. We'd be so far above it, I believe.
I think I understand what she's asking.
Okay.
You should
So-
moving forward.
Is it 12 today? So impact is based on 12 today? Is that correct?
Yes.
Anything below 12?
Below 12.
So if we go to 12, there's no room for them to open up impact. Is that a correct or valid statement? That's what she's asking.
That is a correct statement. There would be no impact pay.
No additional.
Yes.
The agreement would remain the same.
Yes.
Do
So
you
just
have
because
agreement with the union on that, I guess?
Yeah, because I'm saying, if you had 4 more people, now you've got more than 12, and are they then going to argue that the minimum staffing is really 16, not 12?
Gotcha.
There's an arbitration decision that puts it at 12.
That puts it at 12?
Yes. So
And
that
by
was
us going way above doesn't vacate
the arbitration.
that decision.
No.
It doesn't.
So
When
I'm
is the
curious.
next contract negotiations?
They would be for 2025. Yeah, so it would start in the fall of 2024, summer and fall of 2024.
Yeah, that's why Joe
For
put that in there
impact
for 2025 or
If it's
20.
all amount is for impact.
I just wanna make sure it's all.
The total yearly impact?
Yeah.
If we ran it minimum for the entire year, it would be about $98,000.
Minimum. Define minimum, 9?
At 9.
So there's roughly a savings of 100,000, you're saying,
That's correct.
if you run 12.
If we run 12, there'd be no impact payments due.
And that's not reflected in this chart.
But you
No,
did get an
that's in the
impact
chart.
statement including with the 4 of what we did last year, and you can see the significant drop. Yeah, no, we got that a couple weeks ago in our email. So 2022, end of year was a $20,745,000 savings. And when did those, they started when in 2022? I'm trying to remember. Was it June, July?
Our permanent positions, they
Yeah.
were brought on in July,
July.
July 25th.
So it really, on a yearly basis, should be more than the 20,745. Do you know what you're estimating to save this year?
It, with the staffing that we're currently at, I believe we're, let me check the budget.
You don't need to, you can let me know, or let
Sure.
us know. I mean, I don't wanna put you in the spot. But if that's being the case, if they were only a half a year, I would anticipate it being a little bit more than the 20,000. Fair statement?
I have that down as a question to answer for you all, the impact savings.
Thank you.
No problem.
I had it as a question and then you brought it up, so it's good.
No problem.
So in relation to this, I know you gave us the $250,000 for the ambulance, and you're guessing the revenue would be half of what it was this year, correct?
So the revenue projection that you received tonight would be based on capturing an additional 450 calls. It's the same model that we used last year when we were considering the increases in staffing through ARPA. It's a conservative estimate on how much additional revenue would be brought in, but running both ambulances, I would project comfortably that we would bring in about $94,000 additional.
So 400,000 between the two is what you're saying. So I have a question, because a concern that was brought up to me by employees and other people, that your current ambulance, as you stated, is nearing its end of useful life. Is that a correct statement?
It's 10 years old, yes.
So how long are we going to be able to run 2 ambulances without purchasing another one?
The average lifespan on an ambulance is 10 to 15 years, so presumably if we're going to go to a model where we have a primary and a secondary ambulance, the 10-year-old one would become the secondary, and the new vehicle would become the primary. That will certainly extend the life out of the secondary ambulance, even though we would only run it as we need it, when there's those overflow type calls to try to capture the ones that we're currently using the surrounding districts to answer. Our current ambulance has around 40,000 miles on it.
Chief, we were talking about fire, now we're talking about ambulance. And I don't expect you to give me exact percentages, but what percentage would you say your annual calls, the service, are EMS compared to actual firefighting?
Agency-wide, 81.7% of our calls are EMS related. The rest are all related to fire, code enforcement, motor vehicle accidents, the like.
Not to put you on the spot, but when are you anticipating, what would you be anticipating coming to a next council for a new ambulance for the replacement for the existing one? Potentially.
How much time before we would ask for a replacement for the current vehicle?
1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
I would think 5 would be a good estimate. I would not expect something outside of a motor vehicle accident or something
No,
catastrophic
yeah,
to
I
happen to
don't.
the vehicle, but.
I'm talking just normal life.
And again, out of how much you're billing, how much are you actually collecting percentage wise? You know, I know what you bill, but what you collect is another matter.
Yep, gross versus net. That is reflective on the sheet that you were handed tonight. The current payer mix will provide for, out of the gross revenue that's billed, it's around 20.7%, right around 21%. The estimate you have in front of you is more conservative than that. So in other words, the number that you have at the bottom of that page should be a pretty accurate reflection of what you could expect conservatively to generate in additional revenue.
As just a reminder, we really only collect on insurance, so we don't send anyone else to collection. Sometimes people come in and we'll pay because we have to send everyone a bill, but it's just whatever we collect on insurance.
So, I know the county handles the billing, but if an insurance company knows that you're not going to collect from the individual and they start refusing to pay, do you have any recourse against the insurance? How many times do you bill, or do you correct the billing, or do you deal with the fact that they're going to deny payment, especially, you know, if you've got volunteers coming in, for the other? I'm just trying to get a handle on how much is really accurate in terms of this collection when you're talking about an ambulance that's, you know, around $250,000, and the staffing and the supplies and everything else.
So just to clarify, the county does not do our billing. We use a third-party billing provider through All-Star. So it is a medical biller that handles most of the collections on the insurance companies for us.
How aggressive will they be?
Say again?
How aggressive will they be? I guess that's my question, because
I don't know if I have a way to measure that, but we can certainly talk to All-Star, unless you have a way, Chief, to measure how aggressive our billing provider is.
I can certainly check with them to get you a very accurate number. I would say that our collection rate, based on our experience, is right around 90% for the billables. Some of them are certainly write-offs. As we go forward, we do kind of have an ability to monitor those for the non-payables that way of the amount billed, right? So it's,
Medicare's notorious for refusing. Person's ambulatory, they can be walked, they don't wanna pay. I mean, there's a number of, and they're very difficult. So if you've got an older population, and Medicare billing is a lot of the billing, they're not easy to collect on.
Medicare's a good chunk for paramedics. A general rule of thumb, it's been our experience that we're at about $272 per call, which is higher than the estimate that I gave you. Okay, so if we run 1,000 transports, you could reasonably expect to collect around $300,000 in revenue, if that's helpful.
Just having dealt with Medicare on denials, some of which included people who died because they couldn't walk, they couldn't get a stretcher down into the hallway and walk. They said the person could have taken a cab. I mean, that's what you're up against.
That's true. We do try our best to make sure that they're all medically necessary transports. Obviously, some of them are not. Under our current system, we certainly wouldn't be able to deny transport to somebody like that. So you're exactly right. Those ones then ultimately end up being, they will be written off.
Just want people to get a fair indication that just because you bill, and if you're dealing with Medicare as one of your primary sources of revenue, you're gonna be dealing, well, the biller will be dealing with a lot to collect in.
Chief, your contractual and miscellaneous expenses of the 21,650 for the ambulance, that's just per this additional ambulance, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Everything on that sheet is just reflective of the additional costs. It does not include the one we currently pay.
But safe to assume it would be at least 1.5 to double that. If it's running secondary, it wouldn't use as much, but still.
Yeah, just to interpret that, right, so the fuel costs, I estimated at about 2/3. And then certainly, it would be half again as expensive to outfit the ambulance as it does to run our current one. So I just simply took our 2023 budgeted number for supplies and put that in half.
Maybe Kim or Tony can answer this question. You guys worked on it for years. the city being involved in an ambulance service, having its own ambulance service. Do you think it'd be cheaper than $2.4 million to run our own ambulance?
I
Good
don't,
question.
it's a very good question. I know it went out for RFP in 2019, and I know there were some things that came back, but then after that it fizzled. So I can't answer that off the top of my head.
I mean, am I allowed to say something from what Chief Kuhn said? About the 80% collected, or 80% of the calls are EMS, correct? Is that what you said? 81% of the calls that come out of the fire station are EMS. I mean, I missed the public session because I was at JPS, but I think that goes along with that. EMS, fire, I don't know, sorry.
I think the reality of it at the time, the private companies are having a hard enough time staffing their own, and there wasn't a lot of interest in increasing the service and in terms of making money for their businesses, their companies. There's a challenge of keeping employees. There's a challenge of what they will pay their employees. I mean, I think that's just a reality of not just in this particular industry, but in a lot of industries. And so we kind of ran into a stone wall a little bit with looking at privatizing it. And that's kind of what happened. It seemed like it.
I know there was 2 RFPs that came back, and then it was down to 1. I can't not for the life of me remember the details without pulling that out, but I know there was one that was very interested.
Yeah, we could certainly take a look at that. I will say that I think, Tony, you're right. The same challenges do exist in maintaining EMS or maintaining EMTs in particular. We're still seeing that issue.
I know All-Star's had issues with that in the past. I don't know currently if they do or not, but I mean, when we sat and met with them, that was one of the discussions that they had. And then, of course, the hospital changed hands to UPMC, so there was a different strategy involved, different, agendas, and what they wanted to see. When it was a WCA local hospital, there was a little bit more. I don't want to say this the wrong way. Concern in dealing with the local thing, and it wasn't so much corporate. Okay, but the realities of that business have changed over the years, and that's the challenge that we're up against, and that with the significantly increased number of calls, it's been a challenge. When you look at the number of service calls has dramatically increased. Something's got to give, one way or the other. And I would suggest,
So that Joe Bolito would have those numbers, hopefully. I mean, he was looking at creating a city-run ambulance service too, and it was a very expensive proposition. I know Chief Jackson was involved in looking at that about 4 years ago or so. So I think, since Joe's consulting with us, he might be able to pull those numbers out and share those with us, but it's definitely expensive proposition.
For a city run,
City
yes,
run.
you
Yeah,
are
I think
correct,
that's what
which
Jeff
is
was
why
asking.
it went to an RFP.
Right.
yeah, we had like 3 options, and that was
Mhm.
like the worst of the 3.
Yes.
And building like an ambulance
Right.
bay or a hall in conjunction with the DPW building. I was looking at that on Crescent Street. That was another added cost.
In a perfect world, if you had a couple of other competing companies to come to Jamestown that were able to do that, but we don't have that, and we didn't find that, and so then it falls basically on our laps because we have an obligation to deal with public safety. That's part of public safety, and so that's why we're sitting around the table. We're looking at numbers and scratching our heads, and we want to provide the service. We want to do this, but we also want to look at, can we afford it, and how long can we afford it for, and what happens when this runs out and we or whoever is at the table can't do this anymore. Then what happens? And that's the biggest thing. at this point, I think, we have the numbers, do we, I would suggest, digging into them for the rest of the week. I know we have a voting session next week, and I'm not sure we can afford to wait to vote one way or the other anymore, because the grant would be, it's either not gonna be accepted, or it's gonna be accepted, and we can move on, so, at this point, I would suggest that people look it over, ask lots of questions, call Joe, call Matt, call Kim, call the mayor, get all your questions answered, and again, I think it's important, like, as Jeff said, to get this out into the public, to make sure they understand that it's not that we're hesitant or doing this because we don't wanna do it, we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that it's a financially responsible thing down the road, and that we can maintain it and sustain it for the long haul, and not just something that, it's gonna go for a few years and then has to become dismantled. Anything else on this?
No, I didn't have a lot of time, so those are the immediate questions I had at this point.
Again, I would just encourage everybody, if you think of anything else, get in touch with people,
And thanks to Joe Polito for crunching these numbers and getting them out to us.
Okay, moving on to number 2, is also lifting the hiring freeze, to fill a position of one ombudsman in the Office of Corporation Counsel, and note that this is the position of the Associate Corporation Counsel, and this will, with Ben's departure, this will be funded already in the budget for the rest of this year. You have in front of you an updated job description with a salary schedule. It's a salary range, not really a schedule, but,
That's in accordance with their management guidelines.
okay. But I guess I have a question for you in regards to salary range versus salary schedule. Range means you could hire somebody at anywhere in these numbers? Is that what you're telling me?
That's currently how it is in the management guidelines. The initial first number is the base pay, and
Okay,
it could go up to a top range. We don't anticipate on going higher than what it is already budgeted for this year.
for this year.
Mhm. However, we do need to give civil service a range, as you mentioned. So this is, I think I was speaking with Mr. Armando earlier today. The top number is a little higher, but this is approximately the same range as the Associate Corporation Counsel.
So is this a civil service position?
This would not be a civil service, well, it'd be a civil service position, in fact, it's a public position, the civil service checks the qualifications for it, but it would be, management, not confidential, for a confidential position.
When would you plan on putting this out?
For advertising?
For resumes, yeah.
Well, I mean, we could do it, have it out tomorrow if,
Right.
I mean, just so that we could collect resumes if the council's okay with that. We've done that in the past as well, but, obviously, we wouldn't be able to hire until, it's voted on.
The only concern I would have moving forward is, it's we're kinda going back to the way it was, which is fine. But I think, historically, we had an ombudsman, we did away with it when a particular individual retired. We then retained full-time corporation counsel to take that position. Okay, so I guess moving forward, for the rest of this year, it wouldn't be a problem, would be a wash, I would think. But moving into the next budget cycle, we'd have a decision to make as to,
maybe you wanna fund it.
do we wanna fund 2 full-time positions when that was combined several years ago in order to save money? So I mean, I'm just throwing that out there as another thing down the road as you look into 2024. You have to consider, especially if you're gonna go to a higher range within that as someone's hired and they move up and they keep moving up and moving up, that obviously is gonna have a long-term effect down the road on the budget. To have a full-time corporation counsel and a full-time ombudsman, you could be at some point doubling the costs that you have. So just to consider those things as we move forward into 2024, that if we're going to keep this model, we're going to have to consider some other type of arrangement financially if we want to, maintain that level of financial.
What is the salary
Compensation.
for this year?
For the Social Corporation
Yeah.
Council was 57,000.
Thank you.
So realistically, for the rest of this year, you're looking at probably what, 40? Depending on when they're hired, roughly.
You mean in terms of how much is left in that budget?
Yes.
That would probably be
About
around
40-ish,
accurate.
depending on when they start the job. So I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I would just suggest, for this year, it needs to stay where that number was, at least for the rest of this year. And then as you move forward to working on the budget for 2024, we have to consider what we're gonna do with those positions, how they're gonna be structured, and what their salary is gonna be moving forward.
Certainly understand that. Just for the entire council, the reason why we've sought to, resurrect the ombudsman really more as an HR generalist for us is that the human resources needs of the city have changed tremendously. In fact, we've even seen most of our manufacturers, bring back HR positions. But we're seeing more and more mental health issues. We're seeing more and more disputes between employees that we have not seen in many, many years. And our EAP only covers so much of that. And so we're trying to bring an HR position in to assist in that process on top of the litigation that Mr. Armando is currently engaging in, that the council is aware of, that will take a significant amount of time.
I would have to agree with you on that. HR is becoming more and more complicated. It's very, very difficult. Read the Buffalo News on any given day and see how many problems they're having among many organizations with HR, many very high-profile organizations. And to stay on top of it, it probably isn't fair to Corporation Counsel. I have to agree that if the purpose is to really deal with litigation and all these other things and claims, it's very difficult to wear both hats and try to do justice, given the degree and how much is evolving and changing in HR all the time. All the new things, all the new state laws, all the new mandates, all the new training that you have to stay on top of. It would be very difficult for one individual to do both of those well. Now, whether that changes, given that the Corporation Counsel was all of it, maybe there would need to be an adjustment to that down the road. But I think, again, I wasn't here. I knew the last ombudsman, and I knew that position had been eliminated, but I think it's become a much more complicated world in HR.
That's changed a lot.
Oh, it's tremendous.
Was it 20?
Yeah, that was a
at least
totally
20 years?
different kind
Julia,
of.
do you remember what year was that? Early 2000s?
2001 or 2.
Yeah, so it's been over 20 years.
But even then, a lot of it was dealing
Right.
with people's complaints, trying to get them to the right
I mean, it's
department.
changed
It's not the
dramatically.
same.
I know, it's
No,
not the same.
It's clearly not the same. So, whether this is the best plan moving forward, you can contract for HR services, but you're saying that the EAP isn't really enough right now. So this would be one, because the liability can be tremendous if you don't do HR right.
So are you gonna be looking for somebody with HR experience? Is that what your
Yes.
goal is? I mean, cause it doesn't really say that, it just says management or administration,
To keep up to date with trends and laws affecting human resources.
not the qualifications.
But I would hope that that's what we would be looking for.
Our main goal is to have an HR specialist, but this individual will also cover concerns from council members when they reach out to departments, as well as concerns from the public. Looking at the qualifications for the position, we kept it kind of open to see what type of resumes we would be attracting, because there has been some concerns, depending on the pay, what we would see. So we want to have the widest possible, amount of individuals apply.
Just playing devil's advocate, you're gonna get somebody who's gonna meet that A and have absolutely no experience in dealing with the things you're looking for up above.
Yes.
That's my concern.
So, one of those, concerns I had with this ombudsman position that I wanted to address was to have this position go before the council and the mayor before it be approved. So if it doesn't meet those qualifications, that individual will be truly vetted. And I was telling Councilman DeVersa, we may not find the right individual, because this is, in my experience, a key position. Because it's something that, if it's going very well, you're not gonna notice it's there, but if it's not going very well, you're very much gonna notice that.
Finding the right person will be key.
Okay, any other questions? New business, looks like finance too. Resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with the Springbrook Holding Company LLC in the amount of $106,286.50 and American Rescue Plan Act Transparency and Tracking Funds for the purpose of acquiring financial and payroll software subject to the approval of the Corporation Council as to form.
So if I may speak on that, Mr. Dean?
I would hope you will.
All right, so
I have some questions.
hopefully I can answer them. I may need to come back to you if they're too technical with answers from our IT department. We put out a fairly extensive RFP for new payroll software and finance software in the winter, and that included, if you look at the RFP on page 2 and page 3, everything to do with payroll as far as benefit tabs and employee retention items, W-2s. We were basically going to migrate everything from a paper system that we have now to an electronic system when it comes to payroll, time cards, insurance invoices, and general city invoices. So with that RFP, there were 3 bids submitted. If you look at 3 bids submitted, we had one bid for $279,695 for this year, which was very much out of our budget. We had the Springbrook system, which we are recommending, which is for $63,986 for the setup fee, $42,000, $300 for the annual fee, and then we had the ClearGov fee, which was $32,890 in total. I will say with the ClearGov fee, the reason that was not chosen was that RFP bid only addressed number 2 on our request for financial software and budgeting software. It did not address any issues with payroll or insurance.
ClearGov is budgeting only.
Yes.
I believe the county actually uses a component of it as well.
What did you say that number was? 63 what?
Yes, I'm sorry, I misspoke on that. It's, sorry, I got a couple different notes right here. So the annual cost for Springbrook.
There was a bid tab that looks like this.
We didn't get that. We didn't get that. That's why I'm
But
asking.
the question,
we'll make
the
some copies
same
of
one
it
is
and give it
from
to you
May
right
of 2022 that John Selchman got, the total down is $91,683.50.
That's correct.
Is that the correct one? But it said it expired on 11/30/2022.
So the reason it's slightly higher is that did not include an employee payroll portion of it.
I thought it didn't include AR, because I asked that.
It may have been AR, yes. There was one component of it that wasn't included, and then after Mr. Dean and others went through the system along with their finance staff, they recommended that it be included.
It would have to be. That's a very important piece not to include in the proposal.
Yeah.
So, I will speak to this. We are having an increase in fees. So right now we do pay approximately $19,000 per year with a new server that costs between $5,000 and $8,000 every 3 to 5 years. So this is an increased fee, however, we've been using the same software for the last 20 years. Our finance staff has very much, justified the need for this. Looking at what they've told us is, the transition to Springbrook will migrate all of our files, which are in paper versions in the vault right now, onto an online system and increase their workflow. We're basically going to go paperless in the finance department with this system.
Well, not all people.
No, I was gonna
That's-
say, you've done that in finance,
That's,
going full
that's
paper.
slightly inaccurate, yes, so there are things we do need to keep under the record retentions, the local government retention, obviously got wrong, local government retention schedule, yes. So some things we do have to keep, however, we have been scanning, invoices, receipts and things like that for quite some time. Since Ryan has been, what started with the city. So this would allow us to continue to digitize some of that. It would also allow us to approve purchase orders and other things from the departments, as well as move all of our timesheets online. Right now, we do all timesheets on paper, as well as paper slips for each different departments. It would also allow employees their own access. In fact, this is something we're getting from a lot of the newer employees, which is the ability to see their pay stubs and not get a paper stub, as well as to change their tax filings. I know some people really like to change their tax filings during the middle of the year, and so that would allow them to do that. It would then allow our staff just to review those changes and approve them, rather than them having to manually put them in each time those changes are made.
So for clarity, we have a similar service, we use Dayforce, which is a version through our employer, but one issue I would make sure that we cover, that you mentioned, employees can sign in from places that they are not allowed to sign in from their cell phone if they are to report at work. That needs to be very clear, because people have the ability to sign in their cell phone and say they're at their employment, and they're not.
So we use a separate time clock already, and so that would not change.
Okay.
I think what we are saying is for those employees that work a standard set of hours, those would digitize, and then the time clocks. I'll have to double check with Mark to see if those are going to be linked, but they already come digitally. So as employees sign in on those time clocks, those digital records then come to our staff, and we input those manually. But I do agree with you, and we can ensure that happens. We're mostly looking to put in vacation requests, which are all paper form right now, as well as the standardized hours, unless you need to change some of those standardized hours. And the majority of the city now has direct deposit, except for some council members.
So this is an increase of 20, just so everyone's aware, an increase of 23,000 a year in maintenance costs.
That is correct. Which is in line with, I think, what other systems are currently running. This would be a fully cloud-based program. We would no longer have an in-house server, although we would continue running the in-house server for a period of time in order to do lookups if needed for data.
You said 8,000 every 5 years?
Yeah,
5?
5 to 8,000. I couldn't get an exact number on that.
So 15 with a savings of 15 off of that, or 1,500 off the 23,000 roughly.
So the request using ARPA funds does include the first year's maintenance. We don't have to, but we certainly could and can use the rescue plan funds for that.
Just general questions, obviously it's 20 years old, so this is, outside of being cloud-based, should have a whole bunch of improvements. I know one issue that was brought to my attention through the years is the inability to print just one single check without printing a whole batch. Is that an improvement in this software?
I
I believe it,
believe it is.
yes.
Okay.
There was a question that was asked. We've done multiple webinars with
Okay.
this company, and we tried to flush out as many.
Some of your pitfalls,
We
right?
just kept calling back and, just to
Yeah.
make sure. The current software that we have, just on my side of things, we can't go from looking up a tax bill to paying it without backing all the way out,
Gotcha.
which is a very time consuming. So
Sure.
now we'll have the ability to just pull it up, click pay, and so it should save a lot of time at the windows.
And for those that work with Excel, KVS does not play nice with Excel currently.
No.
So you can't export to Excel. This system can. There is a yeah. So there is a there's also some there's a component of it, and I have to double check if that was included in our package, but there's the ability to show kind of some of the public facing data as well, the higher level numbers, which is something that we don't necessarily currently do. We're also able to pull, and I know Kim, you're going to like this, pivot tables from it.
She's the one with the
VLOOKUP, pivot table, they're all mine.
See, Bill's excited about pivot tables too.
It's probably danced on a few, but.
So ultimately, you will also see savings in paper and other expenses too, and the ability to not have to print a whole batch of checks that are voided.
Yeah.
So,
The time savings alone for our staff is they're still handling payroll, but we can start to automate some of the processes, especially when we go back retro pay for unions. And as a reminder, this was also a recommendation from the last audit that we received, moving to a system like this.
that was the last question I had. Is this gonna be more in line with the financial audit recommendations?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was the recommendation from the last audit we received.
So again, I fully support it, but I just want everybody to be aware that we're now adding another $23,000 into next year's budget. Or a little less, given on when you sign the agreement. So speaking of adding things to the budget,
But will it make you more efficient?
yes,
Yes.
oh, absolutely.
And will maybe free up some time for people to do other things?
Yes,
Agree with that 100%, so.
right. I think it'll,
Maybe now, maybe
and
later.
it balance out
Yeah.
at the end.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Under new business? If not, do you have anything tonight?
Just one executive session item, which is personnel.
Okay.
Just to give you all an update. No action to be taken. If I could have Mr. Ramondo stay.
Is there a motion to go into executive session? So move. Second.
Before you go, is it 42,000 a year for a certain amount of period? Is it like a 3-year contract, 5-year contract?
It is a 3-year contract.
Pardon?
A 3-year contract?
Okay, thank you. Forgot to ask that.
All in favor of executive session? Aye. For the reasons of personnel,
No action to be taken. Yep, just an update. City Council.
Zach, can we get this stuff on the fire